FIFA and IOC must ban the United States and Israel from hosting or participating in international sporting events. So yeah, Claudia,
Yeah,
what should we know about this? And let me see if I can fix our little setup here while you get us started.
of course, of course. Yeah, so the North South Project for People Centered Human Rights is a project of BAP, right? Black Lions for Peace. Ajama Baraka is the director of the project, and I've been working with him in the past few months, sort of supporting some of the things that we've been doing. For example, we went to Ecuador for the elections and participated well, we were invited by Movimiento Afrodescendiente Nacional Ecuatoriano, National Afro-Descendant, Afro-Ecuadorian movement, and so one of the leading organizations in Ecuador, African organizations, and we participated in the elections there. Saw really alarming. I've never seen somewhere so militarized for an election, particularly in the poor and working class neighborhoods of Guayaquil. And we went specifically to the places where there was a large amount of African voters. The majority of them heavily militarized. So all that to say, the project has been doing quite a lot of work in the region, but throughout. And this next, this next work that we're doing is calling on FIFA and the International Olympic Committee to one, move the games from the U.S. because aside from the U.S. Bankrolling and supporting for the past almost 2 years now a live stream genocide, and now also including aggression against Iran. They have, and we've seen this, throughout, particularly in LA, but throughout the country, how ICE agents, and not just ICE agents, but police departments that cooperate with them, and different levels of law enforcement that are cooperating in these kidnappings, essentially. Many people that have had families taken away by ICE or by these law enforcement agencies haven't even been able to locate them through ICE, through the ICE database, or a very dedicated team of lawyers, and they still haven't been able to identify where some of these folks have been taken to, right? And of course, we know that ICE, even though it started in the early 2000s, before that was INS, right? Immigration and Naturalization Services. And in the 90s, and we talk about this pretty often, right? In the 90s, what does Erica say? That 90s are severely understudied. But Bill Clinton, not long after the crime bill, then also pushed for IRERA, which was I forget exactly the what it stands for, but Immigration and Responsibility Act, something like that, where it essentially took any sort of deportable crimes from 3 to like dozens, right? So, and it was backtracked, right? So if you ever had any misdemeanor and that was, all good and taken care of, you still are deportable for a crime. So similar to the skyrocketing of Black and African people in privatized jails, similarly with ICE, well, at that point INS, and then it becomes ICE during the Bush administration, and then Obama really takes it up a notch, and that's how he becomes sort of the deporter in chief, right? Deporting more than 3 million people in just the first term alone. So we see that this is not just one party, right? It's both parties of the duopoly. It's the U.S. imperialist capitalist system that one engages in imperialism all throughout the world, right? Coups in the global south. I myself am from Peru, right? And my family moved here after a U.S.-backed coup in the 90s of Alberto Fujimori, right? And my Barrios Altos, became one of the sites of a massacre, huge massacre, including the killing of an 8-year-old boy who was my neighbor and one of my brother's friends. So this is something that's not, it's not just theory, although sure, but this is something that's very, people are being pushed around all over the world, right? Exploitable labor. We're in a pool of exploitable labor. So the U.S. goes into, engages in imperialism throughout the world, forces this migration. Then once people are here, are one become a pool of exploitable labor, which capitalists need, and then now are being are vulnerable and are being hunted down and taken from their communities. We do see that there are people and organizations and coalitions that are forming that are fighting back against these things, but of course, it's still very much ongoing. So this petition is one, I guess, avenue that we can take to really show that and we also know, right, the beautiful game, right? People from all over the world want to come see the World Cup, but is it really safe for them, right? In this moment of severe, repression and hunting people down, essentially, right? Actually, the club World Cup right now, I know some friends that haven't been able to go, or they're going, but they're bringing their passport and their visa because ICE agents are out in the game there. So yeah, this is a petition to get to one, FIFA and IOC. When it was about Russia, were very much on board with immediately getting them out, right? But when it comes to the U.S. or Israel, mum's the word. So this is one way that we are, hoping to, one, raise the consciousness of folks and being able to make these connections, right? That these things are not separate, phenomena, right? A genocide is happening that is being funded, rubber stamped by the U.S., who internally is also engaging in this war against non-European, non-citizens, right? So, yeah, this is, definitely one avenue that we're engaging in to raise these contradictions and actually, eventually this, becomes what would be a boycott of the U.S. and Israel. So yeah.
No, thank you for that. And fellas, anybody have any comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, etc.? And I also wonder, so I watched the travesty last night in the comeback allowing Honduras to beat Panama in penalties in CONCACAF last night in a game played at State Farm Arena in Arizona that looked empty.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought abnormally empty. And I know myself and our family, because we had considered going up to a game in Philly. I know other of my in-laws and have made similar choices elsewhere in the country to not go at all, just out of not wanting to incur any potential, and then also I've wanted to become more aggressive in saying we shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
If FIFA, if these games are going to be played with the support of the state and in its surveillance and incarceration of folks, then why should we go? We shouldn't go.
Yeah. And
So
we've seen this
yeah,
before, for example, in Brazil, right, where like literally favelas were cleared out to make way for stadiums that now are empty, right? But people were kicked out of their homes, right? And similar things are happening. I mean, we have comrades in LA and BAP SoCal that are engaged in the coalition No Olympics LA precisely for these reasons, right? Because it's going to be pushing people out, some of the most vulnerable people out of our communities, in order to make way for these games that they don't actually bring any any revenue to the actual community, right? That stays within the I guess the elites of FIFA, right?
uh, I mean, Daniel's reading Daniel's story from a couple years ago, predicting what's happening next year, if I could phrase it that way. And then Daniel, maybe you want to say a word or two about it. That's what the argument was in recounting what happened at the World Cup in South Africa, in Russia, in Brazil. Uh, folks who don't have the benefit of centuries of imperialist conquest and accumulation are then forced to try to play catch up by further abusing their own populations, doing what you're just describing. And now they're going to be doing not having to do that necessarily here. They're going to use it, and Daniel points out one of my pet peeves, using Dr. King as a sort of liberal erasure. But yeah, anyway, that's just my. But anybody, fellas, anybody thoughts?
I mean, I think the statement kind of speaks for itself. I don't. What was I gonna say? Well, in terms of the hosting, I feel like the die is pretty much cast. I mean, FIFA picks who's gonna host FIFA Cups years and years in advance.
Yeah.
So I think it was in 2018 that Canada, United States, and Mexico were chosen to be the host for this. So the idea that FIFA's gonna read a statement and be like, okay, yeah, we're gonna go put it in England or some other colonial power, which would be the only other place that like you can have a quick turnaround. I mean, it's not that much better. That being said, the participation piece. I mean, if there was a large enough upcry, perhaps like. I mean, the piece rightly points out what happened with Russia, how they were effectively banned from many competitions because of what was deemed an illegal invasion of the Ukraine. So you could probably get some groundswell of support if it was there to make sure Israel wouldn't participate if they qualified, which they probably won't. Whether or not you could drum up enough people to get rid of the United States, I mean, I'd be here for it, but I don't know about that. But like, I think using the World Cup and any international competition to kind of point to what needs to be pointed at, I think is on point. So,
well, don't you think that it is in some sense we've arrived at a point where the world of sports, in some sense, is the clearest 21st century version of the Cold War. I mean, this is clearly about capitalism versus socialism, as far as I can see. I mean, certainly the issue with Russia is, an example of exactly the kind of power that particularly the Western nations have over both the IOC and FIFA. And that power over both the IOC and FIFA is exactly the reason why this petition won't have any impact. I mean, this is we're taking a moral stance. What's going on in Israel is part of, the original notion of manifest destiny. And what are we supposed to do, right? I mean, this is kind of the classic case of how the United States works. Yeah. We've got, millions of people in the streets talking about no kings. But the fact of the matter is protests in the context of global capitalism is quite literally the last and only thing you can do to change this system beyond, doing something more radical. Mm-hmm. So
I think, Robert, you can keep all that pessimism in Brazil, my man. Because I feel like
what pessimism is this?
I feel like this petition is going to be the spark that over the course of the next 360 some odd days in this country, at least, ignites a cry that links itself up to what I was just watching before we got started. What happened in Gladstonsbury yesterday at the festival? Is that
Glastonbury?
Glastonbury. My apologies.
The kneecap.
Kneecap and
Bob
Salute.
Villain. Bob
I
Villain.
like both of these. I was gonna say Bob Villain. I've
Yeah.
never heard of either of these groups before this morning. Bob Villain
Me either.
that's a dope name.
It is.
Salute to
It
the
is.
name in and of itself.
Mhm.
And Kneecap isn't a bad name either for an apparent hip hop duo or some kind of, I don't know exactly what they, don't know what, let me not say that. They presented in the pictures like they might be a hip hop duo. But they were out there saying, and I'm just reporting YouTube, Google, NSA, etc. I'm just reporting that the BBC even aired Bob Villain's call for not only from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and free Palestine, but also death. See, I hit mute by accident. Death to the IDF, and that all went out.
I
And that
saw
all
that.
went
I saw,
out on the BBC.
Yeah.
I saw a clip
Yeah.
of that yesterday.
Yeah.
But to Jared's
Yeah.
point, I think that's right. Like, what is a petition going to do? Right? We understand that in order to actually change anything systematically, right, we need power, right? And exactly to Jared's point, this is one way that it could be the spark to raise that consciousness, raise the contradictions of like, well, you did it with Russia, right? And you did it before with Germany and Japan and South Africa, right? And to actually build that power in order to, whether it's we can actually get a ban and redirecting, right? Maybe it's just Canada and Mexico. I also don't think that will happen. But then the next level becomes a full boycott, right? So this is strategic, right? Process. All right, this is just one step in that, but exactly to Jared's point is to be the spark to raise that consciousness of our folks.
You know, something that's interesting is, unlike the United Nations, FIFA doesn't have vetoing, at least not in the same way. So, like, if there was an international vote at the United Nations, if you want to sanction Israel or something like that, well, the United States would just place its veto power on the table, and then you could have 180 countries out of the 200 and whatever. They could say yes, but it doesn't matter. FIFA, I think, does work on like a one-to-one basis. So if you did,
There's
drum
no
up enough
Security
support,
Council in FIFA.
There's no Security Council. Yeah.
it's
Oh,
one-to-one,
wow.
which is why like the power of the African bloc can get a World Cup in South Africa, or the power of Europe or whatever it could be, could get you whatever. So like if
In
there
the
was enough
whitest
support to be
controlled
like,
country
hey,
in Africa, but yeah.
like we want to ban Israel, perhaps.
Hey,
like
and real quick,
it's not unreasonable.
And because I saw Renee in the chat, please everybody check out Saturdays with Renee from yesterday with Musa Springer and on Black Liberation Media, because in particular because of the perfect juxtaposition between what they were talking about in terms of the whackness of Beyonce and other celebrities in terms of being used by or used to promote a misleadership class. We see artists elsewhere doing the exact opposite. So I think, in terms of Kneecap and Bob Villain. But it also is a reminder that Mutanda, a lot of folks want to hear from you, bro. A lot of folks are happy to see that you've joined us this morning. So let me stop cutting you off. You get
Good morning, Claudia. Thank you for being here. And it's good to see you all. The only thing I was going to say is there is the court of public opinion matters to some degree in terms of pushing that needle forward. And Claudia, you spoke about, like, of course, the reality of what this petition can do relative to the size of the task may be minimal, but it's all about continuing the movement. What I would add is I do think we're in an interesting place where certain things are being said about the state of the world that may not have been said in the past in the places they are being said. For example, Glastonbury, for example, the obviously social media, the very public condemnation of Israel, of the U.S. is in the U.S.'s role in it. And I'll give you this example here in Seattle at a Club World Cup game. The Seattle Sounders supporters group, I think it was against before the game against PSG, and there's a photo that can back this up. Maybe Jared, you could search for it to pull it up. But like, I wasn't at that game, but there's a photo of tons of people holding up Palestinian flag, right, in the Seattle Sounders supporters section before the match against PSG. I'm not sure that would have happened en masse in years prior. There you go. So
That's
and
like
I just,
that's a lot.
it's
Actually,
a lot.
Nor would it have happened in an MLS game.
Right.
I'm not sure about that.
wait,
It's
isn't the
sufficiently-
Seattle Sounders MLS?
Yeah,
but,
I'm
but
sure
this
about
is not
that.
an MLS tournament.
It's not. But that's some. But okay. But they did it. The point is, the people. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that the vast majority of people, are on the right side of history here, and to whatever degree, I hope it's starting to grow. But to whatever degree that makes FIFA and all these governing bodies uncomfortable, then that's fantastic. I think that's a good thing. So I applaud you all, Claudia, with that. Obviously, I support that, and that's where I think that does matter, because the conversations we have are also ways in which power is solidified, and I do believe conversations are shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. Not specifically around Palestine, but the LA Dodgers and their fans have been really pushing for them to say something about these raids and the heavy militarized repression in LA.
I heard the Dodgers did support, relatively speaking, they were supportive of immigrants not being harassed by ICE and allowing them some refuge. Maybe I misread that or heard that, but I heard some sort of.
Yeah, they put like we support our fans or whatever. But I also think that they I saw something about anyone wearing, they weren't letting people go in with any sort of fuck ICE or anything or any signs that were against that. They weren't letting them enter. But for example, if you had a MAGA hat on, they would let you in. I did not verify this, so it's hearsay. But yeah, I mean, I also think that a lot of these clubs and they're gonna realize that they're losing money if these seats are empty, right? So at the end of the day, it's well, capitalists are gonna capital, right? They're gonna just want to follow the money, and if it's not financially viable, would they reconsider? And so maybe that's a thing, right? Again, considering the a petition, to FIFA and IOC, will they even really listen to it? Maybe not, but they might listen to a boycott.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.